with my niggas, we was bomb rushing. Know a lot of niggas, you know, love numbers. If by any chance, don't like what I'm saying. Back when we was having fun with it. Try to fuck with us, you gotta come with it. We was scrap it out and we be done with it. Nowadays, you gotta keep it going with it. Hey, listen what I'm saying. Bitches wanna see me like up in the fist. Bitches want me to the streets say East got money on it. Everything's going on right now. We feeling so alone right now. Streets going up its own right now. Nigga gotta keep it on right now. Tell Shorty come back for me. Y'all didn't want Shorty come back for me. Y'all didn't want Shorty come back for me. Why I want Shorty come back for me? Tell Shorty come back for me. I didn't want Shorty come back for me. I didn't want Shorty come back for me. Why I want Shorty come back for me? But everything's going on right now. I was feeling so alone right now. Streets going up its own right now. We don't give a fuck, still ride by the city, big and slippy, and we glizzied up. Big me, she know he quick to send it up. I miss all my niggas that ain't know it up. Still ain't hit it up, so we never it up. Damn, I miss the block, so you're going through it. I can feel the rest, no matter what we say, and never creeping up. Bad bitch, pop a flag with me, say how to act with me. I don't need how to act with it. I just want to shut, come back from me, I'ma tell him how it is. Couldn't say bye, never got a chance. Damn, I miss my man, that was my lament. Should be hating, my grandma still plays for me. Nigga take none, I'll shake something. How these niggas still flying, another nigga try to make something. I'll tell them how I feel. Let them know the deal. What's 100 drills? That's 100 mil. All money, I be rolling off the seal. 30 bottle got me rolling off the field. Told about my body, I ain't got no chill. I ain't got no chill. Tell them how I feel. Let them know the deal. What's 100 drills? That's 100 mil. All money got me rolling off the seal. 30 bottle got me rolling off a pill.
Purchase your beats today.
Right there. We come from the valley.
be at. Nobody know where I be at, but motherfuckers be at where I be at. There's some snake shit going on, I see that. Me and bro gon' keep them pose where we be at. Bitches wanna set me up, see a nigga wet me up. On the ground shaking, paramedics gotta help me up. Devil got a hold on me, no one let me up. Strain on me, turn me up, no sleep, turn me up. Plenty nights, had to try to be the city, plenty fights. Living in the projects, had plenty mics. 10-year niggas turn to that nigga ice. Same nigga say, love you wanna take your life. Ain't a nigga walking the streets that ever check me. Ain't had a bitch in my sheets that ever kept me. My granddad, the only preacher that ever blessed me. Mama praying for me, the demons will never get me. That's real shit. I got a lot of shit to deal with. 44 Nick, that's a lot of shit to kill with. Niggas from the league that I deal with. Underwood Street niggas that I said meals every nigga. Same niggas I die for. Get up on that stand, tell a lie for. How you ever tease and you don't ride for nigga? Who the fuck did you ride for?
When it comes to being made, it ain't no way to be. FGs, yeah, stand the fuck up. Let's go.
Shot in broad day, that shit happened. Kidnap your brother, turn around and fuck your sister. Wartime in the field, I'm turning into Hitler. Shoot up with the opposition, got my hands full blisters. Pop him in his head, turn his dreads into twisters. The budget took me from a half now to a half guy. You should stash rocks in my shoes, I ain't half socks. Now speeding in the fast drop with a stash box of grounds. As a team pistol on me, that's a mascot. Pull up on a nigga, send flames at his ass. A slug hit his head, he switched lanes and he crashed. The paramedics came and seen his brains on his dash. Police ran under with the gang and you mad. The nigga got changed and you sad. You don't really want to see niggas just go out. Can I got you, shawty? Nigga, I was made for this shit. I was made for this shit. Nigga, I was made for this shit. Goddamn. I was graced the conscience, I was made for this. Granny said I should get paid for this. Cause I keep bars on point on my lazy shit. Yeah, Scott, you probably catch me with your favorite shit. I ain't with it, shoot this whole game of shit. Time to run up on me wrong, let it bang it around. Let it bang, get it tossed, we see brains and shit. Come on, like you ain't no idea, no land and shit. Hell no, nigga, we ain't having none of that. I'm running through his body like a running back. Talking crazy, real applause for your mama. You said it can, you can change, I don't need to pay. If it's so talking about the ones, we be running it. I'm blowing about the blow, and they can't stop it steady. You don't need a chip because we till it come out 100 gas. And if we take a ring, then we run it like 100 packs on the gas. Yeah, they know you are.
Running through the park, leaving brains in the sandbox. It was dark, I ain't even see the red dot. Smoking weed while the D's playing mad lock. Running your crib for the keys while it's bad out. He ain't even see the keys in the padlock. Bitch, 40 here, he want bad mouth. I got so pissed, I take my homies to the stacks house. My other homie put another mag out. She looked at him and looked at me and then she passed out. Long story short, I got no cash now. No one's not talking shit to me, I'm on your ass now. Every nigga that's with me, get on your ass now. But you know we smash out. Throw the backs out. And the max out. Give me key. Rock that low road. One way.
I'm like, no days off with this shit.
crazy, man.
It's supposed to be.
What goes on?
I gotta talk my shit. I gotta shit. I'm gonna tell you, bro. That's right, you had to say it. You really man. And him ain't us. And if you don't come back around, then I wish you the best of luck. I know where your That's right, a bad bitch. I said you take it. So I did it. I made that pill for I mean, it's a man. Yeah, you put on the free show. My side, I call it free throw. Pussy tighter than the T-Bone. Like Debo. Even when you on that bullshit, you get one hit just like D-Rose. When I felt weak, you was strong for me. You was strong woman. I'm proud of you working that. You got your own money. And you handling your business man like you own woman. And you gone from me, baby. And I'm running. In the soaking rain. She don't know me well, but she gon' get the flow of things. I'm leasing weight, she seeing then, we ain't spoken days. My conversation leave her mind from the stroke of brain. I hit her with a pound, and it nearly broke her frame. I think she think I'm Superman, she low as lane. My lucky charm, I just might get that hoe a clover chain. They know my bitch, but they don't know her name. I just might go and get that hoe arranged. No disrespect when I say hoe, but that hoe know a lane. She gon' give a nigga hoe for change instead of coke and chains. She don't get intrigued by red bottoms. She told the last nigga that before the feds got her. She independent with no bread problems. So tap dancing, this is draw, he got on lead bottoms. He trying to travel overseas and get some coca leaves. I'm trying to move a road of weed and not provoke the deeds. She took her feet her in the bun while she smoking weed. She sexy and sophisticated, still be smoking weed. We fucking but putting his dick in your stomach the problem. I fucking brains out and we ain't got nothing in common. So now we scrambled up, so yeah, we got something in omelet. If you get love sick, then I can't do nothing about it. We Shirley talking, she pull out a white out. Working night shift and turn a nigga to a night out. I say get on this D, she ask me when, I tell her right now. I put this pipe in and she get loud, I tell her pipe down.
I think we incompatible, but still I ain't had enough, no. I think we incompatible, but still I ain't had enough, no.
Put him in the verse, kill him all, put the nigga in the hearse. He ain't never spar with a nigga with a curse, no flaws. I'm a dog, I ain't even gotta make niggas already know. Hit it anywhere that I go. Can't no compare my flow, they ain't got no balls. Niggas sound like Chicky, man, they ain't never heard no Nas. I get on my JJ, Cole, Kanye, and Wale. Can I go A-Ball if I kept some bitch, that bitch, she all in my face. Can I go A-Rod if I take shit down? Wow, this bitch why I got a feeling in my shit right now. This just can't be your bitch right now. Feeling like she wanna suck a nigga dick right now. Oh, that's your bitch, huh? I'ma go ahead, play cool, sit back, you talk your shit. There ain't no money, you can floss that shit. Whole time I done lost that shit. Once or twice, drop my head when I drop the dice. I'm on there, never drop the mic. I'm cold, man, never drop the night. I poke fat, but I'm dynamite. Hit shit like I'm Mike, bitch.
Sunny on the beat.
Voila, voila. I know we ain't for no. Perfect, you be perfect. Frustrated, see you frustrated. Voila. Perfect, you be perfect. I see you frustrated. Oh, you must say. They say when they see me, they gon' let them things go. Niggas not crazy, it's so cold. Go. Perfect, you be perfect. I see you frustrated. Oh, you must say. They say when they see me, they gon' let them things go. Niggas not crazy, it's so cold. You know what I'm on. I'm always alone. You ain't gotta like me at all. These bitches get the poppin', niggas get it droppin' right on the floor. Cause if I got you like bitches, crackers, send them right to the mall. Niggas be super stupid, fuckin' with me. I bet you see super douche. You know, rock a corner. How about pick your ass up off the corner? That's a warning. I'm a ball for these shoes like John Wall. I be scoring. I'm a scorcher. Call him shorty, how I'm pop up with that 30. He gon' torture. That was torture. Got a semi, got a brand new 50. Call it Porsche. That's important. Couple bad foreign bitches with me look like they important. They can say came a long way, they never break me. Never pistol on me, on my baby. Daddy raised me, granny prayed, Lord saved me.
I'ma be alright because dizzy.
Okay, time to make my mark. I gave him a head start. Now I'm on my nigga shit. I don't want no fraud. Trying to raise the bar. Rapping like I passed the bar. You would think I'm riding bikes, boy, the way I handle bars. Yeah, new nigga in charge. It's a new nigga in charge. Popping all these blues, I might turn into an avatar. They ain't wanna see me back, he's back. Human crack in the flesh. Sorry, I had to relapse. These niggas weak whack. I twist them like wheat rap. Still on my Nino Brown. Still getting G money or G packs. No stutter man. Busting like that a man. It's evident. These hoes love me. They say my dick is their medicine. Cosby spiking gelatin. Still pushing and pedaling. Settling never. I'm like DiCaprio in the Revenant. Still whipping and stretching it. Tupac ambidextrous. I'm a beast of dog. I see that money, I'm fetching it. Your hoe throwing it at me, I'm catching it. Don't check me, go check it, bitch. You don't wanna get me out of my element. From a tenant in the tenements to owning my residence. Phone still clicking, I feel like a receptionist. But I'm extraterrestrial.
Oh. Oh no. Hey guys, I'm Zephyrus, and first I'll be explaining what the Murder Castle is. And yes, it does live up to its name, but first I'm going to warn you. If you don't like horror movies, then don't watch this, because this is basically a real horror movie that actually happened. This is on the caliber of Saw. Disgusting stuff is going to happen in this video. Anyway, first we're going to talk about the man behind this gruesome creation, Mr. Herman Mudgett, better known under the murderous alias Dr. Henry H. Holmes. He was born on May the 16th, 1861 in New Hampshire, in the northeastern United States. He was the third child of an alleged abusive alcoholic father. He excelled at learning in school, which promptly led to bullying by his classmates and his peers. This most likely contributed to what he was to become. In his early teens, he began to be fascinated with death, a fascination that would really never go away. He soon left school to perform a couple jobs, and he was so promptly married and had a son by age 20. I think his lineage still survives today, though I think they're free of any psychopathic tendencies. In 1880, he enrolled at a local university to study medicine, particularly to steal corpses, disfigure them, which is another word for damage or mutilate them, and make money from insurance. And he did this frequently. So, yeah. After getting his degree, he soon abandoned his family and moved from city to city, killing innocent civilians, often small children. He was rarely questioned, but when he was, he denied any involvement and then just disappeared a few days later, never to be heard from again. He soon found himself in Chicago in 1888, where, through deceit and dishonesty, he acquired a plot of land at an intersection. Here, he began the construction of the titular Murder Castle. See, we're getting there. It only took 4.5 paragraphs. This quote-unquote murder castle was a 5-story hotel, designed entirely by Dr. Holmes, whose express purpose was to lure in, trap, dismember, and ultimately murder unwitting guests. It's like a horror film, as I said previously, except it actually happened, and it would make a great film if more people knew about it. The hotel contained strange features which aided the trapping and killing of guests. There were doors that only opened from the outside, stairs and corridors that didn't actually go anywhere, areas that lacked any form of lighting, and corridors at odd angles and mazes of connecting rooms, and even passageways designed intently to confuse and deceive guests. The rooms were more deadly. All rooms were soundproof and only accessible from the outside. Some were locked in with a remotely operated gas valve, which let Holmes suffocate them at any time. Some were just chambers for a certain method of death, like hanging or starvation. Some people were locked in Dr. Holmes' massive safe downstairs, where they would suffocate to death in a small space over an extended duration. The most graphic one, or at least in my opinion, is the room entirely clad in iron plating, from and including the floor. On command, blowtorches rigged behind these metal walls ignited, slowly but surely heating up the metal plating to be white hot. The participants would suffer a long, drawn-out, and frankly terrifying end, and eventually they would die of burns and incineration. There were steel chutes, not unlike laundry chutes, that were concealed in walls and used to transport the newly deceased to the basement. Holmes, having a degree in medicine and in part anatomy, knew what he was doing when it came to bodies. The methods varied, but some he would dissolve in acid, Breaking Bad style, some he would strip clean and skeleton he would sell to universities and schools, some he would submerge in a very strong alkali solution to strip off unwanted parts of the anatomy, some he would investigate on his operating table, and most went to his crematorium, where complete disposal was easy. The hotel was known as the World's Fair Hotel, as Holmes wanted to lure in tourists to the nearby World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. However, it was nicknamed the Castle, as it was massive compared to the surrounding area. Its nickname soon promptly changed to the Murder Castle, once Holmes was discovered. Speaking of which, Dr. Holmes soon ditched Chicago and had a chaotic few years along the US East Coast, until eventually he was arrested in Boston in November of 1894 for murder. Within 2 years, he was hung for his crimes, and instead of his neck snapping, like hanging should actually work, he suffered a long and drawn-out death as the hanging malfunctioned, and he instead suffocated over the course of minutes, like 20 minutes it took to kill him. A bit like some of his victims. Did he deserve it? Yeah. Ironic? I guess. But fair?
No.
In 1895, the castle, which had now been partially documented by the police, caught fire and exploded in an act of arson, though the arsonists were never arrested. We still don't know everything about that castle. The caretaker and Holmes's associate committed suicide 20 years later without telling us that much. His suicide note was just a single sentence. I couldn't sleep. The wreckage survived until 1938, when it was bulldozed to build the post office, which still stands today. But what's the moral of the story? Don't let psychopaths have money, knowledge, or intelligence like this guy did. Also, if you've got a time machine, it's probably best if you avoid that neighborhood. I've been Zephyrus, and thank you for watching.
Chicago, 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition. Millions of individuals flocked to explore the awaiting opportunities that the city had to offer. Held every 5 years, the World's Fairs served to display new scientific and technological inventions. This fair, named in recognition of the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovery of the New World, included inventions such as fax machines, new telephones, an electric railway, and neon lights. Amidst the excitement, however, ominous events were looming over the city. During this time, America's first serial killer was in the height of his killing spree. The World's Fair provided a perfect opportunity for H.H. Holmes to fulfill his plans. He used his presumably ordinary hotel as well as other methods to lure his victims to what would later be known as the infamous Murder Castle. Here, Holmes tortured and killed countless people, estimates ranging as high as 200. Although many know his name, many do not know the gruesome tale of America's first serial killer. The infamous murderer was born Herman Webster Mudgett in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, to parents Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodette Page Price. On the surface, his childhood seems fairly normal. He had 3 siblings. His parents were devout Methodists. His mother stayed home to care for the kids, and his father worked as a postmaster. However, behind closed doors, his childhood was not as it seemed. His mother had been described as impersonal and cold. She frequently used biblical teachings as guides for parenting. During his time in school, other peers frequently bullied him because of his intelligence, which resulted in seclusion from others his age. Furthermore, his father was an alcoholic, which contributed to himself, his mother, and his siblings facing abuse, both physically and psychologically. Along with being physically beaten, it is believed that his father would deprive the children of food for extended periods of time. Some manifestations of the abuse were worse than others. On the more extreme end, his father would suffocate the children with rags soaked in kerosene to calm them if they cried. This inhumane upbringing would later factor into Holmes' mental instability. Although there are many serial killers with normal childhoods, early childhood abuse or neglect is not uncommon in psychopathic murderers. Due to his abuse, Holmes would often hide in a nearby forest for safety and comfort. During his time there, Holmes developed a sense of wonderment for the concept of life and death. He began to dissect animals that he captured so that he could explore their inner workings. Later told by Holmes himself, he said that his interest in anatomy began when some of his schoolmates locked him in the doctor's office and pressed a skeleton's hand over his face. As time progressed, his thirst for knowledge grew. He first dissected small animals and later moved on to larger animals, such as dogs. This would eventually build up to his morbid fascination with human beings. Some even speculate that his first murder victim was a childhood friend of his. However, Holmes covered this up by stating that it was an accident. His friend simply fell while the two roamed around an abandoned house. Later, at the age of 18, Holmes fell in love with the woman who would become his first wife of many, Clara Levering. However, Holmes most likely did not actually love Clara for her personality, but rather her family's wealth. Clara was born into an affluent farming family, so Holmes saw this as an opportunity to pay for his schooling. At the age of 19, Holmes enrolled at the University of Vermont for 1 year. Growing tired of the country scenery, Holmes left his wife Clara and enrolled in the University of Michigan. While there, Holmes' lust for knowledge and blood would grow exponentially, eventually becoming an obsession that could not be controlled. When Holmes transferred to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, he finished his undergraduate studies and entered the university's Department of Medicine and Surgery. There, his life of crime began, and his interest in human anatomy thrived. He robbed graves and stole cadavers from laboratories, disfigured them, and placed them to make it appear an accidental death. Conveniently, he had already taken out life insurance policies on the corpses, claiming they were family members. Holmes would then collect the money once the bodies were discovered. It is also possible that he used the cadavers for personal sadistic experiments. After conducting his own experiments and perfecting his insurance scams, he left the university as a skilled criminal ready to wreak havoc on the world.
In 1886, Holmes moved to Englewood, a small community on the edge of Chicago, where he adopted his famous alias and began working at a pharmacy on the corner of 63rd and Wallace, just across the street from where he would later build the infamous Murder Castle. The pharmacy was owned by a widow, Mrs. Dr. Holton, who was delighted to acquire the assistance of Holmes after her husband had recently passed away. Here, Holmes put his medical knowledge, but more importantly, his charm and humor, to use to bring in multiple new customers, specifically young women. As time progressed, Holmes became increasingly interested with the profits of the store and began to act more as the manager than simply as the prescription clerk. As Holmes took control of the finances, he stopped giving Holton her share of the revenue. In response, Holton filed a lawsuit. Suspiciously, however, Holton disappeared a short while later, seemingly without a trace. Afterwards, Holmes announced that he had bought the store from her before she had moved out west. Due to this peculiar departure, it is speculated that Holmes killed her in order to acquire the store and silence the lawsuit. After acquiring the drugstore, Holmes added a jewelry counter and hired Ned Connor as a watchmaker and jeweler in 1890. Connor moved into a small apartment above the store with his wife Julia and their young daughter Pearl. Julia, a young, attractive woman, quickly captured the eye of Holmes, who later fired Connor and hired Julia instead. Connor, suspicious of Holmes's affair with his wife, left his family and went to work elsewhere. Connor was correct in his assumption, and Holmes was delighted to have Julia to himself. Soon after, Holmes took out a large insurance policy on both Julia and Pearl, naming himself as the beneficiary. This action makes it appear as if Holmes had villainous intentions to possibly kill them and reap the benefits. However, Holmes delayed this event, as his attention was directed elsewhere. 2 years after Holmes acquired the drugstore, he purchased the lot across the street and began constructing a 3-story building that would be operated as a hotel for the upcoming World's Fair. However, Holmes did not intend for all guests to leave this seemingly normal hotel. Rather, he planned to sadistically torture and kill many victims here. The first floor would consist of various stores, including a jewelry counter for Julia to operate. The second and third floor would contain large living quarters for Holmes, his office, and a labyrinth of torture structures. This maze had 60 rooms and 51 doors, some opening to nothing more than a brick wall. These rooms were specifically designed for torturing victims and were often iron-plated with blowtorch devices or gas jets. Throughout other rooms and halls, there were hidden staircases, secret passages, and trapdoors. There was also a staircase that opened to a steep drop over the alley, as well as a greased chute that led to a lime pit filled with chemicals to help decompose his victims. In Holmes's office, there was a control system, as well as an alarm that would go off to alert him if a victim had escaped. Holmes, the architect of the edifice, was able to bring his murder castle to life without suspicion by continuously hiring and firing building crews, often refusing to pay for their labor or materials. The infamous murder castle was completed in 1892, just in time for the upcoming World's Fair. In order to lure his victims to the castle, Holmes put to use various strategies. One method was simply advertising his hotel as a lodging space for fairgoers. Then, if one of the visitors fit Holmes's desires, he would take them in with the intentions of torture. Holmes also lured victims by seducing women and advertising for marriage through newspapers. He stated that he was a wealthy businessman looking for a suitable wife. After contacting Holmes, women would be instructed to pack all of their belongings, withdraw money, and keep his location a secret. Once the women arrived, if Holmes was sure that no one knew her location, he proposed immediately. After, however, his new fiancées would go missing before the two could marry. Holmes also placed similar classified ads for jobs. He provided them the same instructions and reasoned that they could not tell others of their location due to his competitors' desires to steal his workers. Holmes kept his new prisoners trapped inside his castle, sometimes held captive for months before their final demise.
Perfect victims, because they're unknown in the city. Their relatives, wherever they came from, know that they were coming to Chicago, and they never came back. Now, how do you start to find them? They don't even know where they stayed. Perfect, easy victims. I'm sure some of them got in and out of his place with no problem. And others, they walked in and they never checked out.
Out of the multiple women that entered the castle, all were not prisoners. Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl stayed with Holmes throughout the process of building the castle and after. However, another woman came into Holmes's life in 1893 that would soon replace Julia. Minnie Williams was a young private school instructor in Chicago who responded to one of Holmes's ads for marriage. In it, Holmes claimed he was a wealthy inventor named Harry Gordon. When she arrived at the castle, Holmes initially intended to murder her as he did with the rest. However, he altered his plans when he discovered she was heir to a real estate fortune in Texas. When knowledge of their engagement reached Julia, she was infuriated, as she was still involved with Holmes at the time. Both Julia and her daughter Pearl quickly disappeared. When Ned Connor came to ask Holmes of their whereabouts, Holmes claimed the two moved to Michigan. He would later confess that, since Julia was jealous of Minnie, he killed both her and her daughter Pearl. Minnie and Holmes married the same year that she arrived. She stayed in the castle for more than a year and knew more about Holmes's crimes than any other person. Although she appeared different, her time would end in the same way as the others. While she stayed there, Holmes arranged for the property in Texas to be deemed to a Benton T. Lyman, who was actually Holmes's good friend, Benjamin Peitzel. After this, Minnie's brother was killed in a mining incident that was possibly orchestrated by Holmes. Later, Minnie's sister, Nanny, came to stay at the castle. During her brief stay, she gave over her share of the property in Texas. After this, Nanny disappeared. Holmes later explained that Minnie killed her in a jealous fit of rage after discovering her with Holmes. Holmes later became involved with yet another woman, Georgiana Yoke. She came to Chicago and applied for a job at Holmes's hotel and quickly piqued his interest. The two married on January 17, 1894, with Minnie as their witness. While in Chicago, Holmes maintained the insurance scams, joining forces with his friend Benjamin Peitzel. The duo often traveled around the United States and Canada committing other crimes. However, Holmes's crime spree was cut short in July of 1894 when he was arrested and jailed in St. Louis for an earlier swindle in Texas. During the months spent in the St. Louis jail, he met Marion Hedgepath, a lifetime convict. Holmes told Hedgepath of his crimes and plans of future schemes, which would later lead to his downfall. After being bailed out of jail by Georgiana, Holmes and Peitzel drew up a plan to fake Peitzel's death to collect more life insurance money and split it evenly between the two of them. Holmes was to secure a cadaver, disfigure it, and claim it as the body of Peitzel, who would die in a violent lab explosion. On September 4th, policemen discovered the disfigured body of a man whose face and arms were burnt beyond recognition. Nearby laid a pipe, matches, and broken bottles of flammable liquids. The body was identified as Peitzel, and the insurance company paid Holmes $10,000 as he was acting on behalf of the widow. Everything had gone as planned, except for one detail. The body discovered was not a cadaver. Holmes had, in fact, murdered his accomplice, Benjamin Peitzel. Holmes even convinced Mrs. Peitzel that her husband was still alive and that he had to travel across the country to reach him. 3 of the 5 Peitzel children accompanied Holmes on the trip to see their father. But this was a mistake that would not reveal itself for some time. The insurance agency began investigating the policy that Holmes had taken out on Peitzel. Around the same time, Holmes's connection with his St. Louis jailmate, Marion Hedgepath, resurfaced. While in jail together, Holmes had promised Hedgepath $500 for suggesting Holmes an attorney that would help him in Peitzel's fake death insurance scam. Characteristically, Holmes had not paid him, so Hedgepath tipped police off about Holmes's scams.
In 1894, the insurance agency caught up with Holmes, who was not with the Peitzel children in Boston. At first, he was only charged with fraud. Holmes confessed to faking Peitzel's death for the money and agreed to be extradited to Philadelphia for a trial. Philadelphia police started their own investigation into the matter, and it soon became clear that Holmes had murdered Peitzel. Holmes was then charged with the murder of Benjamin Peitzel and put into custody. Top detective Frank Geyer then began searching for the three Peitzel children, starting by reviewing all of Holmes's prior known locations. Finally, in Toronto, inside of a house that Holmes had previously rented, Geyer discovered the decomposed bodies of Peitzel's daughters buried in the cellar. However, Peitzel's son was yet to be found. The discovery of the two daughters inspired Chicago police to search Holmes's murder castle, where they found the lime pit, torture devices, and bodily remains. Soon after, Geyer found the charred remains of Peitzel's son located inside of a chimney flue in a home in Indiana. Holmes's confessions and stories varied throughout his time in custody. At first, he did not openly say that he was guilty. However, this eventually switched. He confessed to a few murders and then to 27. But, because his story changed so frequently, estimates range from 20 to up to 200 victims. In one of his confessions, Holmes even claimed,
"I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing."
After Holmes's original trial concluded with a unanimous verdict of guilty, Holmes appealed his case. This, however, proved to be futile because the appeal lost. Holmes was sentenced on November 30th, 1895 to be executed by hanging. When his final day arrived at Moyamensing Prison in Pennsylvania, Holmes felt no remorse. Before he was hanged, Holmes spoke to a crowd of more than 120 people.
"I only wish to say that the extent of my wrongdoing in the taking of human life consists in contriving the killing of two women that have died at my hands as a result of criminal operations. I wish to also state, so that there can be no chance of misunderstanding my words hereafter, that I am not guilty of taking the life of any of the Peitzel family, of the three children, or of the father, Benjamin F. Peitzel, of whose death I was convicted and for whose death I am not to be hanged. That is all I have to say."
At 10:12 in the morning, Holmes was fitted with the noose, telling the trembling superintendent,
"Take your time, old man."
Holmes met his demise on May 7, 1896, just 9 days before turning 36 years old. After Holmes's execution, people began speculating that maybe Holmes was not executed after all, and that he somehow escaped. Robert Latimer, once a janitor at Holmes's murder castle, claimed that he had seen letters proving that Holmes conned his lawyer, priest, and jail officials into burying a cadaver in his place. Latimer never produced these letters, but he insisted that Holmes escaped to a New York hotel before moving to a coffee farm in San Paranimbo, Paraguay. Latimer's story, like many others at the time, was full of holes. For one, the South American town of San Paranimbo does not and never did exist. Recently, Holmes's descendants are ready to put that story to rest. In 2016, Holmes's great-grandchildren, John and Richard Mudgett and Cynthia Mudgett Soriano, petitioned the Delaware County Court to exhume the remains. On March 9th of 2017, the court granted permission for the exhumation. However, the court order requires the body to be reburied in the same grave it was taken from within 120 days, regardless of whether it is Holmes's or not. The court also ordered that the exhumation could not create a quote-unquote commercial spectacle or carnival atmosphere. In late April of 2017, Philadelphia-based analysts began exhuming the body of what they presumed to be Holmes, who was buried in Holy Cross Cemetery. A team of researchers from the University of Pennsylvania's Anthropology Department will perform DNA analysis on the remains that have rested in Holmes's coffin for more than a century. Though Holmes died over 100 years ago, his legacy still remains. His story of bloodlust, cruelty, and ingenuity has been an inspiration for numerous people. Eric Larson, best-selling author, wrote the novel The Devil in the White City. This critically acclaimed novel focuses on both the architect who conceptualized the 1893 World's Fair and H.H. Holmes. Larson details on how Holmes used the event to lure, torture, and eventually mutilate his victims. Due to the novel's popularity, it will be made into a film for the big screen in 2019. Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, the creators of the hit TV show American Horror Story, modeled the 5th season of the show, Hotel, on Holmes' murder castle and Holmes himself. There is even a video game where a serial killer goes by the name of H.H. Holmes, who has an accomplice named Peitzel. Holmes' name and actions will undoubtedly continue to incite others throughout the future. Throughout American history, there have been a multitude of infamous murderers, some worse than others. H.H. Holmes, though, remains as one of the most devious serial killers of all time due to the complexity and gruesomeness of his actions. Many question as to how anyone could possibly commit such heinous crimes. In Holmes' case, his abusive and destructive childhood led him to an unnatural obsession with the human body. This obsession would eventually overwhelm Holmes, controlling his every move. Holmes left a wake of destruction in his path, never regretting a single decision.
Welcome to Nellyville, where all newborns get a half a meal. Son gets the Vanderbilt, soon as they can boost to it. And daughters, time is the size of the age. Yeah, 1 year get 1/3, 2 years get 2/3. It was love at the sight. I know.
Who is it?
Troy. Troy.
Hey, what it is, what you wanna know? I don't drink about 100 shows. You'll be coming back to me, and you'll be coming back to me. I was worried about the mother hoes. Hey, you'll be gone when the money goes. Hey, they be looking out for the queen. Hey, they be looking out for the queen. Bitch, bad, no Kanye. What we do it our way. 2015, why? I get no damn about what your mom said. Rolling wrist on the shit. 21. Body rain on the roof. I'm a rain on the run, yeah. But I just want to fuck. Oh, you gotta keep it real. I know you wanna see. I know you wanna be. You might be me. God told me. I know you wanna love. But I just wanna fuck. I know you feel. I gotta keep it real. I know you wanna see. I know you wanna be. You might be me. God told me. Baby girl, see the action. Don't know why you acting. She already said go. She will never let go. Need it all for perfection. No, she think I'm Michael Jackson. Billie Jean moonwalk. I need the front and the back end. She in love with the fashion, but she in love with the fashion. Bitch, this ain't your money, bitch. I spend it on you 'cause you know I have it. Look my balls in the six. X, they say. I'm a rain on the roof. Really rain on the roof. But I just wanna fuck. Oh, you gotta keep it real. I know you wanna see. I know you wanna be. You might be me. Kinda told me. I know you wanna love, but I just wanna fuck. And girl, you know the deal. Gotta keep it real. I know you wanna see. I know you wanna be. You might be me. Kinda told me.
My mom says there's no such thing as monsters. I think she's wrong. When I feel the darkness come out, it feels good.
I like it when you lose. I like it when you go there. I like the way you use. I like that you don't play fair. That's it before disaster. I'm just trying to take my time. Stroke is getting deep and faster. Screaming like I'm out of line. Who came to make sweet love? Not me. Who came to kiss and love? Not me. Who came to beat it up? Rocky. And don't use those hands to put up that dick and stop me. When we fuck, when we fuck, when we fuck, when we fuck, I'm gonna be aggressive. I can be a savage. I just need a blessing. See it like a net. When we fuck, you love it when I lose. You love it when I go there. You love the way I use it. You love it, I don't play fair. You in the
they're calling me master. Say it's true, but it's time. When we got a set disaster. Yeah, end up like this every time. Who came to make sweet love? Not me. Who came to kiss and love? Not me. Who came to beat it up? Rocky. And don't use those hands to put up that gate and stop me. And we